Would you believe, after my last video, some people in the comments got this weird idea that Hogpocalypse Sow is taking some kind of political stance? Blimey, what's this world coming to when you can't make a game about a man defending himself from a rabid porcine threat without politics getting into it? Anyway, in accordance with my usual philosophy, I've focused on the primary gameplay loop so far, and our man is in place killing piggies, roughly the way I said he would in the blueprint. I'm sure some people are already disappointed to see I went with teal and orange for the two colours. It's a cliché for a reason, guys. It's a good contrast, and also doesn't clash with the green grass or the red blood. You might notice I'm taking things on a hyper-gory route, because it's always good for a laugh. Took me ages to figure out what blend mode I needed to be using to multiply the red blood onto the ground. This diagram in the help file was ironically no help at all. I ended up having to add special code that incremented the current combination of blend modes with certain keystrokes, and then play the game and keep pressing them until I saw the one I wanted. For the record, it was 9 and 6. What has changed since the blueprint is the controls, which came as no surprise. I had a feeling this was one of those games I'd have to start working on before the ideal control setup could become clear. The first thing to change was the having two fire buttons. The two rotate buttons are fine. People understand righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. But after you've rotated a few times, which is the left gun and which is the right gun? I toyed with the idea of having the left button firing the gun that is currently on the left, but what if the guns are arranged vertically? In the end, I opted to just have one contextual fire button that shoots whichever gun is aimed at a target, both at once if necessary, which when it happens, does make you feel pretty fucking cool. Also, I've added a quick turn function that doubles as a dodge move if you press it with perfect timing just as a pig attacks. A little bone for the skill obsessives among you. The pigs exclusively attack by stopping just outside close range and then doing a sudden leap attack. This is necessary, because with the player holding their guns quite far from their body, their shots might go right over any pig that gets extremely close, which would just be annoying, and not a little socially awkward. I've also been playing with mouse control options and realised that by adding the option to have the player follow the mouse pointer rather than move with button presses, and to bind rotation to the scroll wheel, it's actually possible to entirely control the game with the mouse, although it does feel a bit wonky depending on your wheel. It's good to know a game can be played one-handed. It reflects a nicely streamlined design, and the player can have a hand free to hold a sandwich or interesting set of genitals. Don't worry though, there's still keyboard and gamepad support, no such thing as too many preferences. I know some people were suggesting that I should just keep standard mouse aiming. Hang on a sec.
I have a suggestion. Why not just keep standard mouse aiming?
Because I don't want to make a standard mouse aim top-down shooter. Okay? I don't want to fall back on what's standard. I want to experiment. Surely that's the point, nay, the duty of short-term game design. Because by experimenting we might find better ways. More likely we won't, but that's the point. An experiment might fail, but it's still better than not even trying. So, now that I'm happy with the primary loop and all its squishy noises, let's talk about what's left to do. Most importantly, I want to escalate gameplay with more types of pigs. Faster pigs, and pigs that change colour that you have to shoot twice. I want there to be two flavours of gameplay. One where the pigs home in on you, and tower defensy levels where the pigs are running past and you have to stop a certain number getting through. I also need to set up some actual levels, and since I feel it's been neglected in Dev Diary so far, I'd like to have an actual story running through them, a very not political one. So that's the rough roadmap, and since I brought up controls, let's address a topic I've been meaning to cover for a while: how to map your game's controls. Now, in a perfect world, every game would have customization menus that let the player map the main functions to whatever bizarre layout suits them, ensuring that even Billy the Lobster Boy can have his turn on the Freak Show's communal Xbox. But not every developer has the time or can be asked. Besides, a lot of players don't want to spend time fiddling with control menus and will usually just dive right in. So if they are then forced to remap because the default controls are shit, then that's your all-important first impression gone right in the bin. With that in mind, you want the default layout to be ideal for as many players as possible. As a professional multi-platform game reviewer, I'm comfortable with mouse, keyboard or gamepad, but I must say, while I'll take a mouse for something largely menu-based or a game that rewards quick manual precision like a first-person shooter, I prefer a gamepad otherwise, and since the keyboard has so many keys that ideal layouts are much more changeable according to preference, it's the gamepad I want to focus on today. Thus we present Yahtzee's philosophy of gamepad mapping. I use a wired Xbox One controller with the dual analog stick, D-pad, face buttons, shoulder and trigger setup that's been more or less standard since the PS1 days. I prefer wired controllers because it seems like the USB ports on my wireless controllers always get fucked up after a while, but I digress. Let's start with the obvious. Hopefully you realise the left analog stick is for movement, right analog stick is for aiming. I'm not sure why it has to be that way round, it just does, alright? But I want to emphasise something. Analog sticks are for analog movement, that is 360-degree movement. If your game only requires up, down, left, right, like it's a 2D platformer or grid-based or something, then for Christ's sake, just let me use the D-pad. Let me use digital controls for digital movement. The analog stick is harder to hold in one direction for too long without it shifting. I know all you 2D indie game developers want to feel like you're rolling with the big boys, but only the big boys need the big boy toys, yeah? Now then, shoulder buttons. I'd like to personally request that you never require the player to press both the shoulder button and trigger on the same side at the same time, because I normally use my index finger, my most dexterous finger, for both. And having to press both at once means I need to bring my middle finger in on this, and the middle finger is both less dexterous and important for maintaining a firm grip. For me, anyway. I'm sure I'll soon be called a scrub in the comments when Six-Fingered Jimmy comes along. And now the big topic, face buttons. Seems like every console gives these different labels, but for me, in terms of control mapping, I think of them thusly. Attack, retreat, instinct, thought. When assigning functions to buttons, I find it useful to consider the movement of the player's hand and what actions or attitudes those movements suggest. The bottom button is instinct because the thumb naturally rests on it, and pressing it requires the least thinking time. The action is also akin to pressing your thumb forwards in a motion of advancement, so to this you bind the most common action that the player uses to advance, like jump in a platformer. It's also good for contextual actions and selecting things in menus because by pressing it the player is saying, yes, please proceed with what we're doing. Conversely, the retreat button is the one that in a menu is for cancelling and going back a step, because pressing it requires you to curl your thumb inwards towards your palm in a defensive gesture. So in an action game this would be good for a dodge or block or something that gets you out of trouble. It's also a good fit for the reload button in a shooter, because reloading is something you do after retreating if you have any sense. That established, you'll already understand why the opposing button is the attack button, and why you'll commonly see it bound to basic attacks in a fighting game. Many games, especially shooters, use the shoulder buttons for attack, i.e. shoot, but a lot of them will reserve the left button for a melee attack or as an alternative contextual action button, since pressing it also requires an advancing motion. Lastly, the top button is thought, simply because in opposition to the instinct button, it requires the most thinking time to use, and if the face buttons were a stylized little man in boxing gloves, it'd be his head. So this is for actions that suggest a change of tactics on the part of the player character. It's frequently used for switching weapons, or slower, heavier attacks that require thinking time. In Hogpocalypse SAO, I'm using it for the quick turn move, because the player might think for a moment and realise that their dumb arse is pointing the wrong gun. That is officially more than anyone should ever write about face buttons, and that concludes the philosophy that guides my gamepad mapping decisions, which I should stress isn't something I'd carve into stone tablets. It's just what makes sense to me. Maybe you can appreciate my logic, maybe you disagree. Maybe you can think of really well-designed games that completely defy my thinking, and will make me look stupid. Drop a comment and let us know. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and don't forget to subscribe. Christ, do I hate myself.